Hey everyone, welcome to Change Starts Here Research Conversations. I am Jennifer Chevalier and I am joined by my friend and colleague Kim Yaris. So today we're going to be talking about student agency. Why don't you kick us off, Kim?
Oh my gosh, I am so excited for this conversation because it is one of my all time favorite topics. As we hinted at it in our last episode, agency is like a close cousin of efficacy, which may make some people wonder what's the difference? So, the person that helped me best to understand the difference was a researcher out of the University of Albany in New York, named Peter Johnston, who wrote a seminal book called Choice Words. So, in that book, he describes student agency as the capacity of students to act purposefully and constructively to influence their own learning and environment. So he argues that agency is foundational to students seeing themselves as capable, self directed learners who can take responsibility for their education.
Hmm. Okay, so essentially, agency is when students are managing their own learning, including making choices about how they learn and what they need as learners. So, an example that I think of is if a student is distracted and unproductive in a noisy classroom environment, that student might ask the teacher for permission to work in the library instead, and that's when they're demonstrating agency.
That's actually a really great example. And it gets at what makes agency fundamentally different from efficacy. And that is one thing: action. Efficacy is believing that you can, and agency is taking the action to do it. So, having said this, Jen, can you think of any stories of agency from your time as an educator?
Yes, tons of them come to mind. How about a time when a student saw another student being bullied? Not only did the bystander student stick up for the child who was being bullied, but he also went to the teacher and explained what happened. So I feel like in circumstances like these, when the bullying is going on, many students don't know what to do, or even if they do know what they should do, they don't take action. But in this case, the student knew he could intervene and he did.
Wow, that is such a powerful example. And it really gets at why fostering agency in students is so important. Because when students go that extra step and take action like that, agency becomes a driving force that empowers them to take control, not just of their learning, but of their lives. So, you know, for me, what this brings up is the flip side, which would be a lack of agency. And that can have serious consequences for students. In fact, it's reminding me of this story that a close colleague that I had once shared about her work as a literacy consultant. So she was asked to help a group of third graders who had been receiving remedial reading instruction since kindergarten. And in spite of all of that extra support that these students had received over the years, they just weren't making the progress that teachers expected that they would. And so they were hoping to get her expertise and insights into why this might be. So she said, well, in order to do that, I'm going to need to meet with them in a group. And so, and get a little information. So the teacher shared some information about them. And based on that information, she went to their book room and chose a book that she knew that the students would be successful with. She got them together and spent some time building rapport because she was a stranger to them. And so by the time it was time to get started, she said, so she passes out the books and she says to the kids in the group, we've got this new book today. What should we do to get started? And she was met with this very awkward Long pause, silence, blank stares. And so she asked again, no, really, what should we do to get started? And then finally, after another pause, one boy very sheepishly raises his hand, looking unsure, and he said, we could open it.
Gosh, really, Kim?
Really.
Oh, wow. I have a lot of things going through my mind right now, but what I hear in that story is that these students must have been in remedial reading for so long, with so much of their learning being directed by others, that they didn't even trust themselves to make the most basic decision, like opening up a book. It's like they internalized the belief that they couldn't lead or succeed without constant guidance from a teacher. It's heartbreaking, but it's also a reminder of why agency and developing that in students is just essential. When we empower students and they learn to take initiative, they're not just learning the content, they're learning how to believe in their own ability to solve problems and make choices. Uh, and when we don't foster that in students, we're definitely leaving them at risk for falling into a cycle like you described of just like that helplessness.
Helplessness. Ugh. So you saying that reminds me of the famous research experiment by Dr. Martin Seligman. And in that experiment, dogs were locked in cages and subjected to electric shocks, which, yeah, I know it sounds terrible. And I hope we don't do experiments like this. I think this was back in the 1960s or early 70s. But later, when the cages were opened and the shocks continued, the dogs didn't even try to escape. They attribute that behavior to learned helplessness, kind of just like the boys in the story that I just shared, which, is such a stark reminder of how debilitating learned helplessness can be when individuals feel powerless to change their circumstances, even when they're given a choice. And so it's making me think that if you understand learned helplessness, then you know its opposite, which is agency, this thing that we're talking about today.
Exactly. And, that's why student agency matters so much. It's really the antidote to that learned helplessness. Agency empowers students to become problem solvers, critical thinkers, and just be adaptable individuals. And I think we can agree that these are essential skills for success in school, in life, and in work. I would say that developing agency doesn't happen automatically, and there are probably some barriers that can stand in the way for different people. So when I think about an example of a barrier, something that comes to mind is like overly structured environments where kids never have to make a choice. It just like stifles their ability to make decisions for themselves because everything's so planned out.
So I think that that is very likely one of the things that was happening in the classrooms of those boys and that remedial reading group. And so I totally know what you mean when you say this. There are just some environments where every moment of the day is planned and dictated by the teacher: when to sit, when to stand, what to do, and even how to do it. And in these environments, students rarely get the chance to make their own decisions, even about small things like choosing a book to read or deciding how to approach a project or when to open the book. So over time, this kind of structure sends a message. Your job is to follow instructions, not to think for yourself. And so it's no wonder that when those students are finally given a choice, they hesitate or don't know what to do. They haven't had the practice and therefore haven't developed the confidence to make decisions on their own.
Absolutely. I mean, an overly structured environment like that doesn't just stifle decision making, but it creates the perfect conditions for another big barrier to developing agency, which is fear of failure. When students are constantly told what to do, how to do it, it sends that subtle but powerful message that it's not okay to make mistakes. There's only one right way. So they start to equate following instructions with success, and anything outside of that feels risky or wrong. And I think over time, this fear can really hold them back from taking initiative or trying something new because they're too afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And, you know, I think it's important to pause right here and acknowledge that as educators, we know how hardworking and well intentioned teachers are. Most of us get into this profession because we care deeply about students and we want them to succeed. But sometimes, in our effort to help, we can unintentionally undermine agency. So, for example, when we micromanage students or jump in to rescue them at the first sign of struggle, we rob them of the opportunity to think for themselves and develop the problem solving skills they'll need to succeed. And it's not because we don't believe in them, it's because we're part of a helping profession and we're hardwired to step in and support. But true agency is born in the space of productive struggle. It's in those moments of effort, challenge, uncertainty that students learn how to persevere, make decisions, and grow.
Yeah, I agree. It is just in the teacher's nature to help, right? We just love kids. We want to help them. And so it can be hard to step back when we see students struggling and getting frustrated. But it really reminds me of something that neuroscientist David Sousa said. He said that the brain that does the work is the brain that does the learning. And so when we allow students to wrestle with challenges, we're not abandoning them. Instead, we're giving them the space they need to develop that agency, to really build their confidence and realize that they are capable of figuring things out on their own. It's that idea of that productive struggle. It's such a powerful gift that us as educators can give to students.
I get it. The brain that does the work is the brain that does the learning. Yes, that. So, in my book, Who's Doing the Work, this is exactly what we talk about, how educators can make small but meaningful shifts to empower students. So, one powerful change that we can make is the language that we use. Instead of immediately giving students the strategy or solution that they need, we can offer prompts that communicate our belief in their ability to figure it out. For example, we might ask, what can you try? Or what do you already know that might help? So these kinds of questions signal to students that we trust them to think through challenges, and that trust is what helps them build the confidence to take ownership in their learning.
Yes, absolutely. Communicating that trust is such a key ingredient to developing agency. It's about showing students that we believe in their ability to solve problems and really take ownership of their learning. And I think one way to do that is by being intentional with our language. Instead of saying something like, let me know if you need help, we could say something like, tell me when you figured something out. It shifts the focus of their capability and encourages them to take the lead of their own learning. And I think these subtle changes in how we speak to students can make a big, big difference in how they see themselves as learners.
I love imagining classrooms where we're saying, let me know when you figured something out. You know, like, wow, what a powerful, like, small shift that we could make. And it just changes everything. Ah, gosh, I love that. So, another powerful way teachers can communicate trust is through wait time. By giving students space to think and process, we show them that we believe that they have what it takes to figure things out for themselves. I'll never forget this one time that I was working with a kindergarten teacher on developing student agency. And she was sitting next to a student who was reading a book about the sea, and the student came across the word seaweed. So if you've ever worked with kindergartners, you know that that is a tough word to figure out when you are 5, especially at the start of the school year, which this was. So the student deliberated for a while, clearly struggling, and kept glancing at his teacher for help. But instead of just jumping in, she waited. And then, after a moment, he got it. That was such a powerful moment because it showed how much can happen when we trust students to persevere and we give them the time that they need to work things through.
Oh, this resonates with me so much. I always say I'm a crock pot, not a microwave. I am somebody who needs that processing time.
Mm-hmm.
So wait time was always so helpful to me. And I think your example really highlights how wait time can just be a simple yet transformative way to foster agency. By stepping back and giving the student space, the teacher really helped him figure out the word, but also built his confidence in his own abilities. It's those small moments that can have such a lasting impact. So let's take a moment to recap the strategies we've talked about so far for building student agency. First, we discussed the importance of using intentional language, like asking students, "What can you try?" or saying, "Tell me something you figured out," to communicate that trust to them. Then we talked about creating opportunities for productive struggle and allowing students to really wrestle with those challenges instead of us jumping in to rescue them. And then you just added on wait time, simply pausing and giving students the room to think as another powerful tool to help them take ownership of their learning.
Exactly. Student agency is really built on the shoulders of self-efficacy. Students have to believe that they can succeed before they'll take the actions that lead to that success. And that's what agency is, doing the thing that you know that you can do. And that belief doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It grows from students having lots of opportunities to practice decision making and leadership. So, for example, imagine a middle school classroom where students are working on a group project. Instead of assigning each student a specific role, the teacher asks the group to decide how to divide the tasks, set their deadlines, and present their findings. At first, it might feel uncomfortable for some students. They might worry about making the wrong decision and or stepping into a leadership role. But as they work through the process and see their decisions take shape, they build confidence in their ability to contribute and succeed. And what's so powerful about this is that it encourages risk taking in a safe, supportive environment. Students learn that it's okay to try, even if things don't go perfectly. And those small risks can lead to big rewards in their growth and their learning.
Well, you're making me reflect on my time as a classroom teacher, and there are definitely places where I could have done better in that area. You made such a great point here, and makes me think of the importance of beginning with the end in mind. Our ultimate vision is for students to leave school ready to go out into the world and live the lives they dream of for themselves. But to do that, they need to believe that they can. And building that belief doesn't happen by accident. It takes the coordinated efforts of everyone in a school working together toward that shared goal. So when we shift our language, recognize opportunities for students to step up and take ownership, allow them to do the things they're capable of, we're really creating an environment where agency can thrive. It's about that systemic synergy.
There we go
Everyone
again.
Everyone from teachers to administrators aligning their efforts to foster those small everyday moments that really empower students to believe in themselves and take meaningful action. When that happens, we're not just teaching content, we're truly preparing students to shape their futures.
And that's it. Exactly. That is what we are aiming for. And it truly does take the coordinated efforts of everyone within a school to make it happen. Jennifer, I have so enjoyed this conversation and wish we could keep it going, but unfortunately, we are out of time. So, thank you, audience, so much for joining us today. If you have enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, share it with your colleagues, and don't forget to tune in next time when we'll be talking about fostering a sense of belonging in schools.